26 days from the general election. What does that mean? That means all of a sudden that misinformation word starts to be spread again. It seems like we're having, it's giving me flashbacks to 4 years ago, to dealing with all the times of misinformation, disinformation, the misinformation board. They brought that word back, and I really do think it's for political gain. I think that would be very unfortunate, because storms should not be politicized. When we're talking about helping people, it shouldn't be politicized. And once again, they've taken a term and they've started to sort of spin it to where, of course, that term doesn't mean what you originally thought it meant. When we've heard misinformation and disinformation, it's usually about people spreading what they claim to be lies on the internet and becoming viral hits and that kind of thing. However, this time, it even means now the scams that come in to storm-riddled areas. This happens all the time. This happens every time there's a storm. That's why you always have the leaders of these states going on, do not sign anything. If someone shows up at your door, be very careful of what you look for online when you're giving donations. There's a lot of scammers out there ready to take advantage of you. But Will, that is not what that word meant. And that is not essentially the dog whistle moment that's happening right now. And we're going to play some videos a bit later in the broadcast where you get to see our vice president in action, having these very staged conversations that are to, in theory, when they'll say, in theory, to help you out, to try to discourage people from falling for scams or for falling for lies on the internet, but they don't feel that way. They feel political in nature.
They trained the world to hear misinformation as rhetoric or ideas from conservatives that the Democrats and the establishment don't like. That was the trained MO of the use of that word. That's why the misinformation...
It was the weird of 2020.
Right, exactly. And so they used it for a while. They had the misinformation governance board that they tried to start. But now when they're using it in the context of this storm, just 26 days from an election, we saw it started really with Karine Jean-Pierre in that joust with Peter Doocy that we played earlier in the week. But now it's spread throughout the entire administration, whether it be Mayorkas, Pete Buttigieg, or even the vice president herself, talking about misinformation instead of scams. They should just be calling them be wary of scams or bad actors. Instead, they're using a word to tie it to conservatives because it's politically expedient for them to make you think that conservatives are trying to harm people during a storm. That is the end goal. In my opinion, the end goal of using misinformation is to try and score political points 26 days from an election and make you think that conservatives are doing something bad and harming people in the path of a storm.
This is a video that was put out on social media between Vice President Kamala Harris and the FEMA administrator, Deanne Criswell. Now, this is a back and forth conversation, and I'll put phone call in quotes, a clearly staged moment, a very scripted moment, a very awkward video, to be honest. I'll just be, someone who makes videos and does this for a living. I think they could have come up with a much better way of doing this and getting the same point across, even though I disagree with some of even the rhetoric, as Will said. A lot of misinformation, disinformation talk, a lot of dog whistling through this. But they could have easily just come together, down the barrel of the camera, spoke to the American people. Instead, you have this weird propaganda-style video. It really does feel that way, a scripted, odd moment between the vice president and the FEMA administrator. Let's take a watch.
How are you doing?
Here we go again, ma'am. I'm in Tampa right at the moment. This one is going to be a bad event.
You were mentioning to me some of the concerns around mis and disinformation.
How's that playing out?
Well, it's just a shame. There was a lot of misinformation that really was not helpful, and saying things like, if you take the $750 from FEMA and you don't pay it back, we're going to take your home. This narrative is false, but it's also hurtful. Yeah. And people aren't registering for assistance because they're hearing this narrative.
And I'm clear on the fact that the $750 is not something that they have to
pay back, right? As long as they can establish that they were in the zone
of harm. That's what they get as part of what we do to help people in need.
And it's just the first, right? It really helps them with those first few needs. The other narrative is that's all FEMA's going to give, which again is false. We are going to help them with financial assistance for any damages to their homes, long-term rentals, or if they incurred costs like hotel costs while they evacuated. All of that will be reimbursed for them as they go through this. But I got to tell you, though, ma'am, that the locals on the ground, the sheriffs on the ground, they are so supportive. Yeah. They are pushing back hard on this narrative.
Apply for aid because it's designed to help you. Please take care of yourself. I'll talk to you again soon, sadly.
All right. I know. I will.
Okay, take care.
They're pushing back hard on this narrative. I mean, even those kind of verbiage is so bizarre and so strange. And look, I think they could have very effectively come together, gotten this information directly to the American people, saying, here's the deal. I'm the Vice President of the United States. I'm one of the FEMA administrators. Let's tell you what's being out there, what you need and what you don't need. And there was a lot of information in that. But instead, Will, it had to be this sort of staged, trying to be cool video. And that's not what we want from our government in this moment. And that $750, one, is a laughable number. But two, when you look back at the COVID crisis, when everyone started getting checks, that was just blanketing. But of course, this one, you have to apply. You have to have this whole process. Some of these people don't have power, internet, no way to apply right now.
You mentioned this performative piece, and you use the word propaganda. This is government propaganda. That is textbook propaganda, because the vice president could have done a stand-up video laying out all these details, reading from a teleprompter. They could have sharing the websites, having talking points that they can put out. But instead, there was a skit. They did a skit.
Yeah, that is true.
With the FEMA director administrator. They took time. There was editing done.
A ton of editing.
A ton of jump cuts there to make it look like the vice president is the one in charge. That's the real message they're trying to get home. That's the propaganda element. The propaganda element isn't just the using the word misinformation. That plays into it. But the propaganda element is trying to make it look like she's the commander-in-chief in this moment. To get this out there, piggybacking off of a natural disaster after it's the second major hurricane disaster we've had in just a week and a half. And we're looking at this video, and it's the vice president trying to say, I'm the boss. I'm making sure everyone's doing their job. Elect me on November 5th because I'm the one on the ground working. And honestly, I'm surprised that Joe Biden's putting up with this.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a silly, like you said, it feels like a sketch, a skit. It doesn't feel real. There are moments in time, and these are one of those moments where we should be able to come together as a country and say, okay, we're going to help those who are in need right now, and we know who those people are, and here's how we're going to do it. And we're going to make this as crystal clear as possible. I think Governor DeSantis did a great job on that. I know you're probably like, well, of course you're going to say that. No, I think he's done a great job in communicating to the people of Florida, and obviously has done a good job in their recovery efforts, as we've seen even through this morning. But I think we should play, actually, sort of the difference. The difference was you had, in this situation, Governor Ron DeSantis, who was pressed on using that misinformation, disinformation terminology at a Florida press conference. And this was this yesterday, day before yesterday?
Yes, it was yesterday.
But yesterday before the storms hit, as they were preparing and talking directly to the American people and to the Floridian people, really, to say, here's what you're going to expect. Here's what we need to do. Okay, none of this putting on a sketch. We're going to answer questions from the press, actually, and get it done. So let's take a listen to, first you'll hear a reporter, and then you'll hear the response from Governor Ron DeSantis.
So obviously the storm is very dangerous, and you've been pushing for evacuations and whatnot. There's also misinformation out there that I think even a member of your team has tried to dispel online. I know the FEMA administrator brought up other reports of misinformation. I just want to know your thoughts.
What specific misinformation you took?
There was one. There was one tweet that was telling people not to evacuate because there was some collusion between FEMA and a security team that wouldn't let people back into their home. That was obviously...
Guys, listen. I think most people are wise to this. We live in an era where if you put out crap online, you can get a lot of people to share it, and you can monetize that. That's just the way it is. But if you're hearing something that's just outrageous, just know, in the state of Florida, none of that stuff would ever fly. So you don't have to worry about that. FEMA is not leading this show. We are leading this show here in the state of Florida.
Yeah, well, it was good to hear from Ron DeSantis saying that Florida was leading it, but also having to even answer this question. The guy mentions one tweet that he saw.
Right.
One tweet, which I'm sure, look, I don't doubt that those things happen. I don't doubt that there are people who are trying to mislead, or as he said, trying to monetize the situation. And again, that is where I've said you do have to be very well aware of scams. You do have to be very well aware of what's going on. And I think he's right that you're not giving the American people enough credit. when they were told to evacuate, large percentage of the people in those areas did do it.
And Logan, you and I have been in the state of Florida for a long time. We've been through many storms in the state of Florida. And you know what we always called those things? Because local news covered it. The state agencies would talk about it. We called them scams. We called them what they are.
Yeah.
They weren't trying to link it to political speak,
it was
to political terminology about misinformation, disinformation. You just called it, don't trust the scammers.
Yeah, like the guys that show up on your front door. It's like, hey, I was up on your roof.
Right.
And there's some holes in there. Okay, who hasn't had that happen? And we've all had that happen in our neighborhoods, likely. If you live in a home, likely you've had some of those people show up at your front door. That's kind of what happens in these, but they're a little bit more opportunistic. They're showing up in moments where people are in deep need. And the problem is they're having them sign over things that they don't know what they're doing. And look, I highly encourage people to be smart about this. But Will's right that they're using political rhetoric to politicize the storm, to politicize this issue, when really all we need to be focused on, all you need, look, I don't even like that Ron DeSantis had to answer that question, because what he should be focusing on, and he is focusing on the people of Florida. What the team in North Carolina and Eastern Tennessee need to be focused on is their people in Eastern Tennessee and in Western North Carolina, not trying to combat political speech.